Brian Katulis, Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute. Thank you so much for joining me on American Dialogues.
Great to be with you.
So, Brian, let's start with the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman recent visit to the United States, where he received a lavish reception from President Trump, which some analysts, including my friend Dr. Paul Sullivan from Johns Hopkins, described as one of the most remarkable receptions for a foreign leader in DC in recent decades. Today, how do you assess the Saudi-US relationship after this visit?
I think it's at its highest point that it's been in years after a very bumpy period when there was a lot of controversy and concerns, but still all is not well. So it was a very significant step forward. I think it charted a pathway for a long-term relationship that deepens ties between the two countries in areas where we both have an interest, Saudi Arabia and America, to cooperate together on critical minerals, on defense, on civilian nuclear issues. But the challenge is going to be the work that needs to be done ahead on all of the individual files. So the optics were good, the vibes were good. The Crown Prince came at a time in America where we're deeply divided and our government was shut down for more than a month. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done to solidify the relationship in these new areas, but also to clarify some questions about key aspects of the proposed sale of F-35 planes and what's going to come next. And, a couple of things that weren't really tackled, which are big dominant issues, are the questions of Palestine, Iran, some of the regional questions. But the key takeaway was that this brought the bilateral relationship to new levels and laid out a vision for where the two countries might go over the next, not just couple of years, but over the next few decades.
So, for more than 80 years, the US-Saudi relationship has been framed primarily through the security and oil paradigm. Uh, Yet there is also a deep people-to-people dimension from the American engineers in the Eastern Province searching for oil to now more than 80,000 Americans living in Saudi Arabia and working, and also the peak of over 100,000 Saudi students in the US. How important is the social layer to this relationship?
It's vital. And I think especially the current generation of Saudi leaders, but also those working for those Saudi leaders, many of whom have lived and worked and were educated in the United States. It's important to expand beyond sort of the important but relatively narrow pillars of the bilateral relationship, which were predicated on energy and oil, and also defense and security cooperation and counterterrorism. So what I see sort of is in the vision that Saudi Arabia has written for itself, the Vision 2030, trying to diversify its economy, expand its relations. What I see is a Vision 2030 for the U.S.-Saudi bilateral relationship unfolding here. And the social aspects of it are essential because connections between the people of Saudi Arabia and America are the things that are going to serve as shock absorbers when inevitably difficult things come up in the formal government to government relations. It's when you have societies bound together through social programs, education exchanges, business cooperation, all of these things. Some people call it soft power, but it's really the things that serve as shock absorbers when tough times come in bilateral relations. And that's why I've benefited from friendships and relationships with people in Saudi Arabia through my work at the Middle East Institute, but at other organizations. And we need more of that. And I think what was signed on this visit offers, again, the potential for more of that. But a lot of things need to be done differently in America to realize the full potential of all of that.
Mm-hmm. And I know you have a podcast called Taking the Edge of the Middle East, right? I think, like, always, the focus has been on tough issues, nuclear, Iran, and energy security. But do you think this, social dimension, people to people, relationship has been underestimated?
Oh, for sure. It's got a lot of power. And the power of people just being able to relate to each other on a personal level. Look, I grew up in the 1980s in America, and the image of Saudi Arabia throughout much of my childhood and then into my early adult years was not positive. And there are a lot of negative episodes that framed how ordinary Americans viewed Saudi Arabia. I think some of those old ways of looking at Saudi Arabia remain in some pockets in America. I've been going to Saudi Arabia for years, but over the last 5 years, the tremendous social change inside that society and the people to people contact through a range of different things and opportunities, not just tourism, or UFC or WWE and things like this. These things seem frivolous, but it's a way to start conversations between Americans and Saudis on different things, where people just want to have fun or take their families to things. I'll tell you one story. My son, who's a teenager, is really excited about going to Saudi Arabia on his next visit because there's an amusement park that he's been seeing on his social media feed and he loves roller coasters and he's like, Dad, can we go? And just think about how that's his worldview. He's 15 years old, and when I was 15 years old, it was quite different. Saudi Arabia again. It wasn't necessarily negative, but it was quite neutral, and it was sort of so exotic or foreign or different. And when he goes, because we will go on a visit there, and not only experiences what that amusement park has to offer, but then importantly hangs out with some of the children of my friends who are Saudi officials or Saudi businessmen and others like this. It'll establish relations of the sort that I have from my 20s when I lived in Palestine and Egypt and Jordan that I carry with me 30 years later that are important professionally in my work. And it's again, it serves as a buffer that binds the two countries together in ways that I think are quite powerful and go beyond weapon systems and nuclear programs and things like that.
100%. And as you just, highlighted, there's still, the negative stereotypes. And I think the media, uh, contributes to, maintaining or prolonging these stereotypes. What is the role of institutes like, the Middle East Institute in deconstructing these stereotypes?
Well, we do several things. I mean, we're a traditional think tank, so we offer policy analysis on what's going on in U.S. policy in the Middle East and important files like the U.S.-Saudi relations or Syria or Israel-Palestine. But we don't just stay with that. What we do is we actually engage in dialogue. We've had structured dialogues in Saudi Arabia with Saudi counterparts in forums that have been off the record, but have been quite candid. And because they're off the record, quite candid with officials and academics and others that explore the opportunities and the potential for broadening and deepening US Saudi relations. And then we also don't stop in those dialogues or on the policy issues. We have a number of cultural programs. We have an arts and culture program at the Middle East Institute, including an art gallery and films and music. And we've done cooperative projects with friends in Saudi Arabia. And because of this flourishing of the arts and culture scene inside of Saudi Arabia, I think there's tremendous potential for even more to basically fulfill our mission. And the Middle East Institute is almost 80 years old. We were established in 1946. And our main mission is to help Americans understand what's going on in this important part of the world and deepen and broaden our understanding. So I focus on policy, but we have other programs that are helping people in America understand the fullness and richness of the change that's going on in places like Saudi Arabia and really appreciating the complexity as opposed to the one-dimensional stereotypes that you often see in the media.
Correct. So during the Saudi Crown Prince visit, uh, Saudi Arabia signed with the US the 123 Agreement on Civilian Nuclear Cooperation. How important is this agreement in reshaping the relationship and the cooperation, especially in energy security?
Oh, it's vital, and if you see the trends in energy demand in the world, and especially in places like Saudi Arabia, and especially in a country like Saudi Arabia that is prioritizing high tech and artificial intelligence as a strategic sector, and as we know, AI requires so much energy and energy production. It's causing some challenges here in the United States, or where I'm from in the United States, where there's a big debate. We're going to need all types of energy. It's not just fossil fuels or renewables. It's going to be both, and nuclear is a key component of it. As we know, the nuclear questions across the Middle East have animated all sorts of challenges and opportunities. Iran and the questions everybody still has about what it was doing with its centrifuges. It's a strategic sector that's important for global energy production and production for energy that will be required for artificial intelligence data centers. But hopefully what's developed in the framework agreement between the United States and Saudi Arabia can serve as some sort of model that other countries across the region that face energy challenges. And we have one in place, a 123 agreement already between the United States and the United Arab Emirates. And that's, I think, an important model. But this will also provide a benefit for these strategic economic sectors, and also promote bilateral cooperation. And from an American perspective, it's so much better, in my view, for our two countries to work together rather than to see Saudi Arabia turn to other countries that have this technology, Russia, China, and others. This is a key part of the strategic rationale that I think drove both the Trump administration and also the Biden administration to pursue deepening ties beyond the traditional sectors in places like civilian nuclear energy. But I think a lot of details need to be worked out in terms of how this cooperation will be implemented.
Yes, and two words that have been used during, the remarks in the White House, uh, critical minerals.
Yeah.
Why have these, minerals become so central now to the relationship?
Well, it's central to the new great game of geopolitical competition right now. As we know, China has cornered the market on many of the critical minerals that are needed for high tech, all sorts of things, including F-35s and all the processors that we need. And what we know is that Saudi Arabia has significant deposits of this. So there's very unique arrangements that were developed here that involve including the Department of War, formerly the Pentagon, the Department of Defense, the U.S. Department of Defense, becoming partners with Saudi Arabia in a business consortium that essentially sends the signal that Saudi Arabia and the United States are going to be working together to help diversify away from the dependence the entire world has on China's dominance in this sector. And I actually think it's central and key that we move forward on this front. This is going to take many years, I think, because mining these materials and then processing them, this will take many, many years. But again, much in the same way when Franklin Delano Roosevelt met the King of Saudi Arabia way back when, I think what they did, they charted sort of one pathway for the two countries to work together, and this critical minerals is key to winning the future. It's essential to a lot of building the new technology that will drive the rest of the world. And the main thing is that it brings the United States and Saudi Arabia more closely together at a time when China is trying to dominate the market on critical minerals.
Correct. And, the potential sale of the F-35 fighter jets to Saudi Arabia, faced lots of Israeli objections. And we saw the Israeli lobby in DC almost in an emergency to stop Trump from, announcing that uh, sale or potential sale. But he did announce that despite the objections. What does that mean?
Well, it means, again, President Trump, I think, has prioritized the bilateral relationship in his approach to the Middle East and the world. He sees Saudi Arabia as a key partner. It was the first country he went to in his first term, and it was the first stop in his Middle East tour in May in his second term. So I think it sends a key signal. Now, the key thing on the F-35s, this is yet another, like the critical minerals or civilian nuclear energy cooperation. The devil will be in the details. And as I read it as an analyst, all of these details are not fully worked out. And it's not just Israel and its supporters inside of America and their voices there will be very strong concerns raised about the potential sale of this because it's the most sophisticated fighter jet that we have. There still are partisan divisions on many different things, as we saw in the government shutdown this fall that lasted more than a month. And the issue of U.S.-Saudi relations still can be politicized in ways that prevent the ultimate sale, because President Trump does not have full authority to move forward. He can announce certain things and say he'd like to do this. And the other detail that needs to be worked out is this question of qualitative military edge that is written into U.S. law for Israel, that Israel should maintain a qualitative military edge. So that's why I think it was an important sign that Trump announced this, that he intends to do this, but the intent to sell is sends one signal, but actually being able to do it will require a lot of political legwork, not only in the U.S.-Israel relationship and offering reassurances to Israel, but then secondly, the role that Congress will have to play in approving the sale of this, and the long, these things like critical minerals and like civilian nuclear cooperation will take years, and probably years beyond this current Trump administration, which is why I think it's important that Saudi Arabia maintain an approach in its engagement with the United States that understands that we've got two different political parties and many different voices, and tries to cultivate positive ties in a way that builds relations with both Republicans and Democrats. I think that's the soundest sort of pathway forward for Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, and that is one thing that I really noticed in the Crown Prince remarks in the White House. His emphasis that Saudi Arabia is ready to work with both Republican and Democrat, and he also recalled how the relationship started under President Roosevelt, a Democrat.
Yeah.
So despite the tensions also during the Biden administration, the two sides still came close to signing strategic agreements. So what does this tell us about the Saudi-US relationship in the future?
Again, it's currently on a more solid footing, but I would be careful not to declare victory before a lot of the hard work is done. And there's a lot of hard work in ironing out the wrinkles and answering questions about the key details of the sale of F-35s, of the civilian nuclear energy cooperation, of the critical minerals framework, other things like AI data centers and things like this. It needs to be an ongoing conversation. So I wouldn't, to use an American football term, I wouldn't spike the ball and celebrate before we've passed and gotten a touchdown. The team is moving up the field and it's looking a lot better these days, but there's a lot of work to be done, and the devil is in the details. And I hope the United States maintains its focus in the way that Trump has prioritized this relationship at a leader-to-leader level. But we need many different working groups and people working on many different levels to continue this conversation so we have continued progress.
Do you think there is ongoing effort to move that forward?
Yes, I mean, I believe there is. One challenge we have in the American system, but also particularly in the Trump administration, is this ADD, attention deficit disorder. We often get distracted by many different issues. And there's also key questions about the Trump administration beyond sort of his trusted advisors like Steve Witkoff and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Are there enough people? Do we have a full embassy staffed in Riyadh? Are there people working day in and day out to actually carry this forward? And I think those are important questions to ask, because yes, ambitious leaders who have a lot of energy can get a lot done. But if they really want to see their results sort of sustain and be lasting, you actually need to have institutions working closely together.
And there is still no ambassador, right, in Riyadh?
Yeah, and I don't hear of any sign of that happening. And look, I've come to appreciate the importance of ambassadors living and working in Washington, D.C., seeing the tremendous job that the Saudi ambassador, Princess Rima bin Bandar, has been doing over the last several years. Because it's one thing to have an ambitious leader back home in the capital, and key advisors around him and things like this. But it really was Princess Rima who played an important role in building all of these ties. And the fact that the United States still doesn't have one, concerns me because, again, going back to the earlier point we were talking about, you need people to people relations in many different sectors, in education and in private business in the private sector. But you also need these traditional tools of diplomacy, which in some ways, we've unilaterally disarmed ourselves in the first 10 months of the Trump administration in doing that because there aren't enough key people moving this forward. And then, the one thing we haven't really talked about is these really difficult regional security issues: Palestine, Israel's role, Iran. There are a lot of still open questions about whether the progress we've seen in thwarting Iran's capabilities to threaten its neighbors, the progress we've seen in the ceasefire in October between Israel and Hamas, all of these things, if they're not dealt with, and Sudan, I was encouraged to see the Crown Prince ask President Trump to play a more forceful role in Sudan. I think that's important to do. But the key thing is that if you have these regional security questions that aren't fully yet resolved or stable, this could upset all of the efforts to build bilateral ties between the United States and Saudi Arabia if there's still a perception and a reality of broader regional instability.
Yeah, and also since you highlighted, the role of, Princess Rima, I think that shows, the importance of diplomacy and having, diplomats in the ground trying, to bring views closer. And I remember meeting Princess Rima in Miami during the one of the editions of the FII forums. And
Yes.
she would attend the forum from at 7 a.m. and she would still like till late, in the evening, engaging,
Yes.
talking to people and trying, to connect to the American, society, whether business people or politicians. So, as you just highlighted the importance of, diplomacy in that. So if you want to elaborate, talk more about that, that would be great.
No, I mean, again, this is where the day-to-day, and it's not just the ambassador herself who's done, I think, a tremendous job, but it's the full team that she's had engaging. And then the fact also that we benefit in Washington from regular visits from different ministers. The economic minister I saw recently at an event Princess Rima hosted in a dinner that involved some of the key titans of American tech industry. So it's important to have these leader-to-leader summits, like we just saw in last month's visit by the Crown Prince to Washington, D.C., but you need these other ongoing discussions, events that bind people together. And the ambassador is the key point person, but the people around her in the embassy is key. And if we don't have that, I mean, we have personnel in Riyadh in the embassy, but we don't have an ambassador. If you don't have somebody leading that charge, it concerns me. So you need sort of that ongoing, continuous diplomacy that is ready and steady and regular. You also need in our American system, I think, bringing, as we talked about before, Democrats and Republicans along, especially in Congress. So congressional delegations visiting the kingdom, very important. And there was a spell there during the very difficult years of Trump's first term where many, I think no Democrats actually visited for several years, in part because it had become such a partisan issue. That was then, this is now. So now we have an opportunity to march forward together, but we need a full team to actually make that happen.
Yeah, so you just mentioned, the Sudan war. How significant could the U.S. Saudi coordination there, be in ending this war? And do you
Look,
see real momentum now?
so I think it could be significant, but from an American perspective, Trump is trying to do so many things all at once in the world. And as we see from his failed attempts to get Russia to stop its war from Ukraine, or when you see, President Trump likes to tout all of these conflicts that he's resolved in Africa and Armenia and other
Four
places.
or six?
Yeah, well, when you actually look in the details of a lot of that, it's a bit more, from my perspective as an independent analyst, a lot more public relations as opposed to serious resolution of these conflicts. So, another case in point, closer to your home, is this 20-point plan on Gaza. Yes, there's a ceasefire that was achieved, and thank heavens, hostages were returned. But if you look at the events in Gaza day to day, Palestinians are still being killed. There's still some underlying tensions in the full sort of humanitarian aid and support there. So this is the challenge with Trump, and it's more of a U.S. challenge these days, is that since we've unilaterally disarmed on diplomacy, since there aren't as many people on the Trump team as there were in previous administrations, and including his first administration, it raises the question of who actually is going to be the point person. I mean, Steve Witkoff, it has so many different files,
Yeah.
and he plays a role in many of these things, in part because he's a trusted confidant of the president, but goes back to the other issue of if you don't have a big enough team to get things done. So I think with Saudi Arabia focusing in on it, I understand why. It's a big key country closer to its borders. What happens in the Sudan has more direct resonance and impact inside of Saudi Arabia quite directly. When the heated moments of the conflict, Sudanese people were coming to Saudi Arabia. So it has a direct impact there. So what I'm waiting to see, and I know there was at the Arab Summit just today in Bahrain, another sort of reaffirmation of the importance of this initiative. But as an analyst, I'm waiting to see what is the actual game plan, and I don't see a game plan yet.
I hear you. Well, Brian Catullus, Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute, thank you so much for your time and very, insightful talk today.
Great, thanks for having me. Great to chat with you.